Some 10 years before I was first invited to give talks to objectivist conferences, I was actually a hardcore Marxist. I was a card-carrying member of the youth of the Greek Communist Party. And Marxism, communism, and the revolution were things that I took quite seriously. I was daydreaming about general strikes and barricades. And at some point, I even had an unauthorized plan in my mind on how to take over Athens overnight in a coup. And on more serious endeavors, I had read Das Kapital by Marx 3 times, and I was infatuated by it. Now the question is, why would I, a middle-class, spoiled kid, who at that point in his life had never met a single worker, why would I be a Marxist? And there were many reasons. There was a family link. I had extended family members who fought in the Second World War with the communist guerrillas in the mountains. I had family members who fought in the Greek Civil War, and they were even exiled for their ideas. My mother was a rank-and-file member of the Communist Party, and I grew up reading poems and listening to songs praising these selfless people who fought for social justice. So in the mind of 15-year-old Nikos, the communists were these larger-than-life figures because they were idealists in a world that did not believe in ideals anymore. Even their political opponents in Greece, they would mention that, look, we disagree with the Communist Party, but we recognize that these people have values. We recognize that these people are ideologues, that these people believe in something. And the other thing that attracted me to communism was that I was an atheist, I was a kid interested in ideas, and there was nothing like intellectual curiosity on the right or on the center. So the idea was, if you are intellectually curious, obviously you are of the left. And the communists were not only intellectuals, they were intellectuals who, when the time came, would take to the streets, or who even would take the rifle to fight for justice. So in my mind, the communist was this badass. He was a man of ideas, but also a man of action. And of course, I was not the only one infatuated with communism. In the 20th century, millions of young, idealistic people were ready to kill and to die for communism. And many actually did. Within 50 years from Marx's death, Marx died in late 19th century, 83. Within 50 years, communism spreads like wildfire. This is very quick for an intellectual movement, such a quick success. There was a time where more than 20 countries in the world had an openly Marxist regime. There was a time where 1/3 of the world's population was living under communism. But even in Western Europe, in non-communist countries, there was a time where in Italy, the Communist Party would take 1/3 of the vote, 30%. 30% of people in a Western country would say, we want a Marxist-Leninist party which is loyal to Moscow. In France, far-left ideas were so prevalent that in 1968, for some weeks, the country was at the threshold of revolution, a Western European country. But even in the English-speaking world, many brilliant minds were taken over by communism. If you watch the film Oppenheimer, you've seen how many geniuses, how many brilliant scientists sincerely thought that Soviet Union is the future. How did Stalin get the secret of the nuclear bomb? Because there were many scientists who literally volunteered. They tried to find the KGB link to give to Soviet Union the secret of the nuclear bomb. Because again, Soviet Union was the future. Now, what makes the intellectual success of communism even more unfathomable is that it was successful despite having zero real-life success to showcase. Marxism was appealing despite the mountains of corpses. Marxism was appealing despite the famines, despite the poverty that it brought. So this makes it even more pressing for us. It makes it even more pressing for an intellectually curious person to understand the appeal of Marxism. And that's what we're going to do today. So let's get on with it. To understand why Marxism is appealing, we need to understand what is the essence of Marxism. What is Marxism about? Now, if we had Marx here, and we'd ask him, what is the essence of your system? He would say, my system is just a theory of history and a theory of economics, historical materialism, and I explain to you how with surplus value the worker is exploited. But that was not the essence of what made Marxism appealing. Because Marxism was not only a theory of economics. Marxism was also a moral imperative. Marxism was also an ethical cry. How does Marx describe communism, the vision? From its according to ability to its according to need. From its according to ability to its according to need. What does this mean? Your effort for the benefit of others. You work for the group. You give yourself to the group. I told you that my mother was a communist, and she had actually traveled to all communist countries. She had even sat at the same table with Erich Honecker, the leader of East Germany. So quite often I would ask her, what did you find appealing in communism? Like, you've seen the true face of communism. What did you find appealing in it? And she would say, every time she would give me the same answer, she would say, for me, communism is a simple idea. If I have a jacket, I want everyone to have a jacket. If I have a jacket, I want everyone to have a jacket. So this gives us another insight into how communism presents itself. It's about brotherhood. It's about sharing. It's about making sure that everyone has what they need. In other words, communism is about selflessness. In other words, communism is about altruism. And of course, we've been told that altruism is the only morality which is good. To be good is to be selfless. To be good is to self-sacrifice. And the Marxists capitalized on that. Of course, we, who have actually read Ayn Rand, we know that altruism does not mean kindness and benevolence. Altruism does not mean solidarity to those who suffer. Altruism is something deeper and actually more insidious. Because behind this facade of solidarity, it tells you that your life is not yours. It tells you that your goal is to constantly work for others. And that you actually have a duty to do so. That you have a duty to put your efforts out there until everyone else has a jacket, to use like my mother saying. So here we have here we can hold the first element of Marx's appeal. This morality that we've heard since we were kids from our teachers, from our priests, the morality of altruism. But this would not be enough. The moral appeal would not be enough, because if you think about it, also the church has a similar moral appeal. The church is telling you something similar, that your efforts should go to the benefit of other people. But the church was not the most prominent intellectual movement of the 20th century. Marxism was. So we need to find another ingredient in Marxism. And the other ingredient is that this moral appeal was wrapped up in an intellectual package. Marxism presented itself as an intellectually serious movement. So it could appeal to people who otherwise wouldn't fall for the Christian message, because, well, who has time for religion and all that stuff? How did Marx present his socialism? It was scientific socialism. Scientific socialism. So there was a lot of theory with Marxism. There was a theory of history. There was a theory of politics, a theory of economics, a theory of art. Today it would be very difficult to get it, but there was a time when Marxists presented themselves as the best advocates of the Enlightenment. Marxists presented themselves as the best advocates for modernity. And many intellectually curious people fell for it. If you were for reason and progress, you were for Marxism. If you were for Marxism, you were for reason and progress. Of course, Marxism and communism did not produce any progress, but they produced a lot of intellectuals, a lot of intellectuals. No matter in what field you were, it would be dominated by Marxist intellectuals. You study history, you've come across Hobsbawm. You study culture studies, you've come across Gramsci. Literary theory, Althusser. Social justice, Marcuse. Study anything under the sun, Foucault. Now, why is it so important to have the intellectuals by one's side? Because as Ayn Rand put it, the intellectuals are the transmission belt of ideas. The intellectuals are the trendsetters. Of course, it's philosophy that gives us the general principles, what world we live in, what is the good. But the intellectuals in different fields take these general principles and, let's say, popularize them. Hayek put it in a way that I think he hits the nail on the head. He says, once the intellectuals are sold on an idea, it's only a matter of time for the rest of the people to also find this idea popular. I mean, think about critical race theory. 2 decades ago, critical race theory only existed not just in academia, in a fringe of academia. Like you'd walk in a random academic department, the average academic wouldn't know what critical race theory is. Today, critical race theory has become something like the official ideology of major institutions. Again, intellectuals are the trendsetters. So now we have also a second ingredient in the intellectual appeal of Marxism. The moral message, but also dressed in a respectable intellectual outfit. But there's also a third element, and this third element is quite often missed by the student of history. And the third element is that Marxism was presented in a quite appealing way. To put it simple, communism was cool. And here we have the role of some other intellectuals. We have the role of the artists. We have the role of the creators in masterpieces, in art, and in political propaganda. Of course, there was also a lot of rubbish, but there were also the masterpieces. The films of Sergei Eisenstein, the music of Shostakovich, the poems of Pablo Neruda. Again, I could start naming names of artists who were fellow travelers or card-carrying Marxists, and we'd be here till tomorrow. You know Pablo Picasso, you know his Guernica, but you know that Picasso at some point actually drew a portrait of Stalin. The novels of Steinbeck, the plays of Bertolt Brecht, the films by Jean-Luc Godard, who defined what is cool in the Paris of the 1960s. As a Greek poet put it, communism is the youth and the beauty of the world. Of course, we know that communism was not the youth of the world. Communism was actually the most lethal political system in history. And yet, it managed to present itself under this most heroic of lights. Think about it this way. If communism was a movie, the soundtrack and the cinematography were so cool that you'd run the risk of forgetting how crap the actual movie you're watching was. So here are the three ingredients then. Marxism presents itself as an advocate of the morality that we all agree that it's the best. Marxism presents itself as an intellectually robust movement. And also, Marxism presents itself in the most aesthetic of lights. Now, these would be necessary conditions for the success of Marxism, but not sufficient conditions. There's one more condition that the movement needs to have, and this is numbers. Marx, while he was alive, was a virtually unknown figure. But when, towards the end of his life and after that, he had the popularizers. He had Engels. He had Kautsky. There were then the political leaders passing the baton. Lenin. There were the icons like Che Guevara. So it started with the ideas, but then the ideas need to spread to more and more areas. So Marxism was a successful movement because a lot of people advocated for it in many different ways and on different levels. The moral, the intellectual, the aesthetic. Now, why do we care about all this? What is the takeaway for us? Why do we, in, let's say, the wider freedom movement, and I use this term quite loosely, what can we learn from the success of Marxism? First of all, before we learn any success, we should already be pissed off. Why do these people with these crappy ideas, why have they been so successful? So we should, to begin with, we should get a bit angry and get a bit more determined. Okay, we need to understand what is happening here. So think about the freedom movement. The freedom movement has been good in what? In making the economic claim for capitalism, right? We've had very good economists. We have these cool concepts like the reverse hockey stick, the eye-pencil story. All this is great. But this is not enough. Remember, Marxism's success was not based on economics. Marxists attack on all intellectual fronts. Marxists had intellectual certainty, intellectual self-confidence. They had moral certainty. They had a vision about the future. Compare this with the average classical liberal. Timid, dry. I was reading a book last year, A Defense of Liberalism, and its main point was that liberalism is the proper system because it hasn't killed as many people as communism. Or listen the famous Thomas Sowell quote, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. Who is going to go to the party gates for trade-offs? So this is not enough. We need, first of all, we need to attack communism at its strongest points, and this is its morality. There is no way we can overpass this. I know it sounds difficult, right? It's difficult to, okay, how can we attack this morality that's been so prevalent? But we have to do it. Because if we don't do it, Marxists standing on a pile of tens of millions of corpses can still say, we're the good guys. They will destroy another country, they will bring another famine, and they'll say, oops, but it was all for a good cause. Only 13 years after the Berlin Wall fell, there was an opinion poll in Eastern Germany, in what used to be East Germany. So these were people who lived under communism. And it gave them a proposition to evaluate whether they agree or disagree. The proposition was, socialism is a good idea that was badly implemented. 82% of people, more than 8 out of 10, agreed with the proposition. These were people who had lived under Stasi. These were people who would wake up in the morning and face the wall. These were people who were standing in queues, and still they could not question the morality that was behind their bondage. These were people who fought bravely against the dictatorship, but they could not question the strongest backbone of this dictatorship, its morality. So there is no shortcut to finding a new morality and to trying to fight the morality of self-sacrifice. So we need a new morality. We need intellectual rigor, because again, we want to address the best minds. The minds who falsely thought that to be an intellectual means to be a leftist. And also we need the third element that Marxism had, a heroic vision, a heroic art to fuel our fight for the future. Now all this sounds too much. Where are we going to find that? Well, it's here. Someone has already paved the way for us. Ayn Rand has given a new radical morality, radically opposing the morality of self-sacrifice. Ayn Rand has given a robust intellectual defense of freedom. And Ayn Rand has given us the heroic vision. But she only made the beginning. Remember, it's necessary to have these three things: morality, intellectual rigor, vision, but not sufficient. We also need numbers. We also need minds. We need intellectuals and activists who will take the baton and who will champion this great vision, and the ideas that gave humanity its best days, that they will advocate it in more and more fields. We need more teachers, more artists, more content creators. And these could be you. Thank you.